Okay, so you were nominated as a candidate, but you were in the vetting process, I believe, and you were disbarred. Is that the correct term?
Yeah, to be honest, I'm not absolutely certain about the terminology, but what happened was I was nominated as a candidate by 10 members of the SNP in Falkirk. I was also nominated in Airdrie and Shotts by a branch of the SNP. And then while those selection processes were underway in the constituency for members to decide who they want, I was going through the SNP's central vetting process by which the HQ decides whether you're allowed to be nominated. And I was, extremely shocked to be failed, disbarred, disqualified on the central HQ process.
Now, you were given feedback, is that right, which said that it was an issue of, what was the term, sorry? Basically that you weren't fully prepared to toe the party line.
Yeah, it was failure to commit to group discipline, was the exact term I was given. And I should say that was the only feedback I was given, simply one sentence, failure to commit to group discipline, which, rather shocked me.
And what do you think was the test on group discipline?
Well, there were two stages. There was first of all an assessment panel, which I failed, and then secondly there was an appeal. At the assessment panel stage, I was asked a question which was whether, as part of an agreement in Westminster with another party, I would vote for the bedroom tax if, ordered by the whip to vote for the bedroom tax. And I said no, I couldn't vote for the bedroom tax, having campaigned against it. That would be sort of monstrously hypocritical, and I couldn't do that. And I can honestly say to you that was the only question I can think of which could, in which my answer could in any way be said to indicate a lack of commitment to group discipline. That question on the bedroom tax was the only thing in the vetting process which seemed to go to that point particularly. So I can only believe it was that answer on which I was failed, and I haven't been told anything else.
Yeah, it seems like a bit of a strange question. It's one of these. Well, do you believe it's sort of with a view in mind to some kind of coalition in the Westminster Parliament?
I think it's one of two things. I think they want to be quite sure that they get MPs who will go along with a coalition, because that obviously. That must be the meaning of the question, but also, it seems to me extremely strange to have a loyalty test in which the test of your loyalty is your willingness to vote against party policy. That seems very, very peculiar indeed. I think the whole idea of using your willingness to vote for the bedroom tax as a test of your party loyalty is rather perverse.
Yeah. Well, it's something which it hasn't been particularly popular. This news. It seems quite upsetting to many people. Many of whom, of course, were looking forward to having not just yourself but various other non-party people representing us in Westminster. Something a bit more relevant to Scotland and Scottish politics, defending us down in Westminster. I mean, is this? Do you think that this is something to do with the idea of the SNP machine that people talk about? Is it becoming a little bit too sort of down the New Labour line?
Yeah, I mean, I should say I've actually been an SNP member for 3 years. I only became, if you like, really activated by the Yes campaign, but I joined 3 years ago. I think that there's a dichotomy here between, if you like, the the joyous, disorganized citizen activism of the Yes movement, which was the most exciting time of my life and maybe of many other people's lives. Just the energy on the street, the fact that so many people were involved, and it wasn't controlled and it wasn't organized, and often events would happen spontaneously with nobody really in charge. And you have people who came from that background who piled into the SNP, but the SNP institutionally, is really quite an authoritarian structure and expects a high level of discipline. So when you get this new sort of joyous upswelling of popular activism merging with the existing rather dour party political style culture of the SNP, there's bound to be fallout. And I think what's happened to me, and unfortunately I've come to be a kind of test case for that fallout as to what happens when the two clash. That's my own feeling about it.
Yeah, I mean, there's maybe another way of looking at it, is that a party doesn't get to be anywhere near as successful as the SNP. I mean, the SNP have completely, swept the board in Scottish politics without that kind of almost a corporate discipline within the structure.
Yeah, the danger of that is, of course, that the Labour Party used to be even more dominant in Scottish politics than the SNP is now. The Labour Party, even 10 years ago, had an apparently extremely strong dominant position in Scottish politics. And while the Labour Party was so dominant, they seem to have decided that all they really needed, particularly in their MSPs, but in most of their elected representatives, was people whose main qualification was blind obedience. You don't find many intellectuals in the ranks of elected Labour Party officials. And look what happened to them. It was, in fact, that lack of ability and creativity and talent on the Labour benches, the fact that really Labour became a party of unthinking numpties, that's what led to their decline. And I really don't want to see the SNP following the same path.
Yeah, I think there's a big sort of elephant in the room with the SNP, and that is that there's always been quite a strong socialist Republican element within the SNP, which is not very well recognised or represented by the party's core and leadership, and particularly now we've got 80% of the parties are new members, and it's although we can't say, we don't have the data right now, I mean it's more than likely that a good majority of those will describe themselves as both socialist and also as Republicans, as is quite strong in Scotland. You also had a 350-word submission, a statement, a personal statement, which you gave, in which you outlined yourself as a socialist Republican. Do you think there's any issue there with socialist republicanism within the SNP? Did you detect any?
I should clarify. I'm not actually sure I am a socialist. My view on social issues is much more motivated by compassion than by ideology, if you see what I mean. I'm certainly not a Marxist, for example. But I am a Republican, and I am to the left of the SNP. I think that's true. Yeah, I do think. I mean, one thing that interested me was you had this loyalty test to weed out left-wing people, saying, would you be prepared to vote for the bedroom tax as part of the deal? There was no loyalty tax to weed out right-wing people. There was no question about, would you be prepared to vote for an 80% top rate of income tax if ordered to do so by the whips, if you see what I mean. The only loyalty test was designed to attack left-wing people, not to attack right-wing people. I found that rather sinister.
So you think that there is actually an agenda within the SNP to try and control, this. I mean, it must be, a very strong element.
Well, I mean, my view is this: that you've got to remember that for an awful lot of the people who do control the SNP, it's their living, it's what they get paid for. It's how they make their money. It is their career. And increasingly, more and more people are coming through the SNP. Since the SNP got more and more elected representatives, it means they also got more special advisors, they got more people working in MPs and MSPs and MEPs, officers, and they're getting their own political cadre. And there's an element of career protection in all this, if you see what I mean. Keeping control of the party is actually keeping control of their own livelihood. And one of my worries about the SNP is, like any other political party which is successful, it's starting to attract people who are much more interested in their career than their salary than they are in the idea of independence, and which is something else, of course, I said in that 350-word statement that I wanted to put out to the SNP members of Falkirk.
I'm reminded of something that a colleague of ours said at an event we were at. I was the only person that day not wearing a suit. And he said that's the difference with the SNP these days. You're the only person not wearing a suit. You know, in the past, maybe 10 years prior to that, you would have, you know, some people would wear suits, that's normal, but there was more of a sort of, you know, casual approach, real working people. But yeah, I mean, there's an awful lot of cafe latte kind of stuff going on these days, I've noticed. I think that was Robin McAlpine's criticism, was the new breeds of, you know, SNP, its backroom staff was walking around with a cafe latte in one hand and a book about how Obama won the election in the other.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very valid criticism, and it worries me. You know, the backroom staff, the professional political class, is the pain. I want to see a citizen activism. I think we need a new politics where being a politician is not a full-time career for life. You know, it's something which active citizens who have done very interesting other things in their lives do in their spare time. I don't actually particularly want to have a professional political class at all. I think that's something we should be trying to get away from.
I mean, you know, we're all looking forward to a new kind of politics. And maybe we should, you know, get away from the SNP for this one and just talk about, I mean, where are you going to go from this point onwards? I mean, you do have options. You could maybe use the Scottish Socialist Party or the Green Party, or you could potentially, some people have suggested, go as an independent candidate. Or do you think that not going to the House of Commons and doing something slightly different, using your energies in a better way?
Well, I don't think there's any practical way to get into the House of Commons having been rejected by the SNP. I'm still of the view that the SNP is the best vehicle we have towards achieving independence. I mean, obviously, having been, you know, rather kicked by them, I'm going to have to think things through carefully. And I should say that, because this is actually quite important, that I only went public on this. My aim was to be quiet, but I received a phone call from the Scotsman at 8 o'clock this morning, and the Scotsman had been given a lot of detail of my rejection and been briefed against me, and plainly, you know, that briefing had come from within the SNP. In fact, it couldn't have come from anywhere else. And so, you know, I've gone public and said what I've said, because tomorrow the Scotsman, or Scotland on Sunday, as they are called on the Sunday, you know, is going to come out with an attack article about me. But having been subjected to this by the SNP, I have to give it thought. But my present thinking is that the SNP remains the best vehicle we have for achieving independence. So my present idea is to stay within the SNP and hope that we can, okay, I'm not going to Parliament, but from the SNP, with the help of all those new members, we can try to change the SNP and maybe get rid of some of these, you know, Tammany Hall type professional politicians, Labour Party central belt style practices that are going on inside the SNP. Get rid of some of that and make it a different kind of vehicle, which won't be achievable immediately, but I think maybe can be done.
Okay. I've got some comments here from viewers. David S. Is asking, do you think that maybe your past history and musings could have been a target for the opposition? And he quotes no voters being thick, in quotations. I don't know if did you say that?
Yeah, I said something along those lines. Yeah, I mean, well, what I was arguing was that the British state is a force that has become a force for evil in the world, and I was talking about extraordinary rendition and torture, of which, of course, I have a long history as a whistleblower on that subject, and also the illegal invasion of Iraq, the undermining of the authority of the Security Council through the illegal invasion of Iraq, and our alliances with countries like Bahrain, where we're now sending aircraft carriers, and where there's a very dictatorial regime. The British state is not a force for good in the world. So if you want to maintain the British state, either you support that, you're neoconservative, and you support evil in the world, or you're too thick to realise what you were doing. that was the argument I put. Of course, I don't actually believe that no voters, have low IQ or however you want to express it. But my blog is a polemic blog. It argues in a rather 19th century polemic style. And the idea is to say things vigorously and hard and make people think. And yes, of course, that means the way to be a successful politician in some ways is to be, very bland and join the neoconservative consensus and never say anything. But that's not me. Yes, of course, I quite often get attacked by the mainstream media, but the entire independence movement gets rubbished by the mainstream media every day. We don't give up because we might get rubbished by the mainstream media. That's a daft reason for not selecting somebody.
And I think that's one of the areas that I was am still very strong on for the new politics and New Scotland is getting away from the military-industrial complex and getting it out of our society, out of our economy. I mean, it's one thing I find is very difficult to do without causing a lot of trouble. I mean, I do it anyway. Is to be correctly critical of war and killing, because of the ways in which the system has tied innocent people and their reputations to that. So you can't criticize the murderers because they're just soldiers doing their job. It's not their fault, it's the machine.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think, and one thing that has scared me an awful lot is the sheer amount of militarism being promoted in the popular media, and the fact that you can hardly have any kind of public occasion nowadays without army or armed force personnel in uniform parading a flag or doing something similar. We didn't used to have soldiers marching around at pretty well every public gathering 10, 20 years ago. There's been an increasing glorification of the military. That really worries me. A military is an unfortunate necessity which should be used for self-defense, not something glorious which should be used to invade other countries.
No, I mean, there's no glory in war. That's something that really needs to be understood. But I find that even within Scotland now, there's an increasing militarisation of the police, which is a pattern that we see across. It starts in the United States and it's across the world, and it's part of what we call the military-industrial complex. A term which doesn't mean anything specifically. It's just an interconnected economy of weapons providers, and then the politics which gives people reasons to need the purchase of the weapons and the services.
Yeah. No,
this is the big question. We want to get out of NATO. We want to get away from nuclear weaponry. We don't want a militarized police, and we don't want soldiers going propping up the economic empire of the corporatocracy. How does Scotland remove itself realistically? Obviously there are dark forces behind the scenes that we do need to be realistic about.
Yeah, no, it's going to be very difficult. One thing which I was very keen to get over to people, especially having worked myself in Whitehall for over 20 years, over 6 years as a member of the senior civil service, was if we had won the referendum, still things would not would not have gone easily and smoothly. They would have done everything they possibly could to destabilise Scotland's economy, to make as many difficulties as they could in the negotiation process, and to undermine Scotland abroad and try to, for example, move further to block Scotland's membership of the EU and to cause problems with the Americans. They would have been playing every dirty trick you can think of, even perhaps up to the point of false flag violence. It was already scary the way that they were absolutely falsely projecting independent supporters as violence through the media on at every chance they got. So we're not going to achieve independence without a great deal of difficulty, and with every dirty trick you can think of going, from MI5 and the CIA. They never thought we would get as much as 45%. They were absolutely shocked and terrified by our achievement. They weren't anticipating that at all. If they thought we would have come that close, they would never have allowed us to have a referendum in the first place. They were supremely confident, with the entire mainstream media, with the entire corporate sector, virtually the entire corporate sector on their side, and all of the Westminster political establishment on their side, that we'd be struggling to get 30%. We have terrified them now, and next time they'll give us an even less fair chance than we had this time. And I can promise you, I'm absolutely certain that already MI5 assets and CIA assets are being targeted now on the Scottish independence movement in a way they weren't being targeted when they weren't taking us as seriously as they now are.
Yeah. We had Sean Clarkin speaking to us earlier on today, and more or less on the basis of what you were saying as well, he believes that come 2016, provided that we return pro-independence parties to Holyrood, that would be the basis for a universal declaration of independence. So not giving them the opportunity to rig a vote, as they potentially might have done a little bit, at least in the last one. Do you believe in a UDI, or is it something that comes with its own problems?
Well, there isn't any solution that doesn't come with problems. But the great majority of countries in the world, probably 2/3 of the countries of the world, have become independent within my own lifetime, and the vast majority of those became independent without ever having a referendum. There's nothing which says you have to have a referendum to become independent. Nothing in international law at all. And independence is, of course, primarily a concept in international law. One thing which I think will be an important driver of events is the coming general election. I actually think it's quite likely the Tories will get back in. Historically, in every election since 1945, the governing parties gained ground in the last 6 months in the opinion polls. They'll have a giveaway budget in March, and a lot of the UKIP support will probably go back to the Tories for the general election vote. And I don't rule out a Tory government, a Tory UKIP coalition, conceivably, with although the UKIP will only have a very few MPs, I think. And I don't rule out the possibility of the UK voting to leave the European Union. Now that could be a trigger for a Scottish declaration of UDI, which would actually then gain a great deal of international support, because there'd be a great deal of sympathy within the EU if Scotland wished to declare UDI in order to stay in the EU while the rest of the United Kingdom leaves. So there are several different possible scenarios, but I don't rule out UDI at all. That seems to me definitely a way forward.
Okay. I've got a question here from a viewer, Sean Gill, he asks, have other potential candidates been asked the same bedroom tax question? Do you know?
Someone actually, a gentleman whose surname was Tulloch, I think it was Andrew Tulloch, I may have got the first name wrong, posted on my Facebook page today that he had been vetted in the same process as me, and he had been asked the same question. He'd been vetted in the same day as me, in the same pool. He said he had been asked the same question. Other people have said they weren't asked precisely the same question, but were asked whether they would agree to support austerity and welfare reforms as part of a coalition, without necessarily specifically mentioning the bedroom tax. But it does seem to have been a part of a general loyalty test. It doesn't seem to be only me, although only one other person has said that they were asked specifically about the bedroom tax.
Because I did speak to some other, someone else within the party just a little before we came on, and they had been through vetting, but it had been a little while back, and as far as they were concerned, you were asked a jump how high, that kind of question. There was nothing actually specific. It was, are you going to do what you're told? Yes, and that was it, in a sort of in a light-hearted manner. So I don't know if things have changed because it's the 2015. If this is with a view to something, or if it's really just a case of management technique and corporate style control. The latter I'm a little bit concerned about, although I sort of understand trying to keep the success of an operation.
Yeah, I think it's. I mean, it definitely is a thing of corporate control. The question is what causes it. I was advised before I ever went along for the assessment that because of the defection of a couple of MSPs over NATO, that they lost a couple of MSPs over NATO, and that because of that, they are because of that they're particularly worried and concerned that other MPs elected representatives won't defect. So that's why such a harsh loyalty test, if you like. The other possibility is that it is partly in reaction to the emergence of so many new members, and this eruption of kind of new blood and new vigour into the party. They want to make absolutely sure it's kept under control. And I guess it's kind of a combination of those two things.
Okay, I've got Brian McHugh says there are always two sides to every story, and possibility of misunderstandings of others' positions. So it's more a statement that potentially there's room here for it being a misunderstanding. So David S. also says the bedroom tax question is a red herring. It is not he says it is not the reason for Craig's rejections. So I don't know if David S. knows something that we don't.
Well, I should say I have only been told one thing. I mean, I've asked in writing if I could have feedback on why I was rejected. I received no reply to that. The only thing I was told, and I put the exact text of the emails I received on my blog, people can look at them there, the only thing I was told was it was a failure to commit to group discipline. And as I say, the only question I was asked which could indicate a failure to commit to group discipline was a question on the bedroom tax. If it was anything else, I'd be as interested to know as anyone else. And if David S. is indicating there's something else mysterious or dark about me, which is why they rejected me, well, I haven't been told that either. I mean, it's mysterious from me too. And I think, unfortunately, you're going to get ultra-loyalist people coming on now saying, oh no, it's because Craig Murray is a totally bad person and dreadful, and it's a really good thing he was stopped. And of course, that goes to the territory, and I expect that. But as I say, if there is another reason, I can swear to you I haven't been told it. And I think it would be very wrong if I've been rejected for a reason I have not been told.
Okay. Lenny Stein says the British establishment couldn't keep Craig on a leash. I would imagine the SNP would struggle to hold him to heel. So, I mean, there is a potential here. I mean, if you're being seen as a loose cannon kind of guy, someone who speaks their mind, does what they think is right, and that could be damaging, to Operation Commons, and sort of the other side using it as a way of attacking the SNP, if your views were out of line, that kind of thing.
Well, I seem to remember people used to say the same kind of things about Alex Salmond 20 years ago, and
Yeah.
and I think a party needs that. You know, I think it's far worse, far worse to look like the Labour Party in Hollywood, where you just don't have anyone, you don't have people capable of coming up with new ideas or new thoughts or any political initiatives. Do you just want your MPs to be voting fodder who don't have any thoughts of their own? Because if that's what you want, then fine. And there are plenty of people working in MPs' offices or special advisors who seem to be the sort of people the SNP particularly want, who will be able to do that. But it's not in the long term good for the party. And I think the idea that MPs should be on a leash is wrong. It's part of what's wrong with politics. People should vote for people because they're good-hearted people who they trust and agree with in general, not because they're going to. What's the point? Why have people at all? If their sole purpose is to vote the way they're told, why not just send cardboard cutouts and save the money?
Yeah, okay. David S. says that Craig is too much of a liability, well qualified, but could do more harm than good. So, okay, let's move away from that. But I mean, what is your position on NATO? Do you believe that the SNP's position on NATO needs to change back to what it has always been, which is that we don't want to be a part of it?
Yeah, I mean,
personally, personal point, that was a big mistake. I was really disappointed with that decision. To do a U-turn on NATO.
Yeah, no, I believe that we need to change back to being anti-NATO. We need to do that as soon as possible. I think that the position on NATO was adopted. Many people in the SNP voted for it because they accepted the argument that this would make the referendum easier, that it would buy off the Americans, prevent the Americans from interfering in the referendum. Well, it didn't do that. And also, one of the, in my view, one of the reasons we lost the referendum was that failure to generate momentum and excitement in the last fortnight. And part of the reason we couldn't generate any momentum or excitement was we were going in saying, vote for independence, and don't worry, nothing will change. Nothing will change. You'll still have the same currency, you'll still have a queen, you'll still be in NATO. It won't actually make any difference to you whatsoever. To which the obvious answer is, well, if it won't make any difference, why would I vote for it? I think we need to be much more full-blooded and have a much stronger independence agenda in which we are going to shake up and change things, and that's why we want to do it. And I think leaving NATO is going to be part of that. I should say I was actually asked about NATO, also not so much in the initial assessment process, but in the appeal process, where I was asked whether I would go along with being in NATO if I became an MP. And what I said to them was that actually, while something like possession of nuclear weapons was for me a matter of absolute principle, and I would never vote for Trident, for example, on NATO, it's an institutional organisation, and I'm against it, but it's not a question of absolute principle for me. What I would try and do on that one is I would be trying very, very hard to change the policy within party structures, because I believe the policy could be changed very easily, because I'm quite sure the vast majority of new members are anti-NATO. And I pointed out to them that 2 years ago, up until 2 years ago, Angus Robertson was a rebel on NATO, and he didn't agree with the party policy because he wanted to be in NATO. And it seems to me quite extraordinary that, because again, there's very definitely hostility towards me from the appeals panel because I was anti-NATO. They were hostile to me on that point. And yet, it was okay for people to be pro-NATO when the policy was anti-NATO. No one was hostile to them or suggested they shouldn't be allowed to stand for Parliament. Again, all the loyalty tests all go one way. It's all designed to exclude the left wing and not the right wing.
Okay. I suppose we could veer slightly off topic, if you like. We're hopefully going to be speaking to Robert Black, QC, early in January. Now, this was 26 years ago. The Lockerbie bombing happens, and 270 people were tragically killed. Who exactly was behind the killing of 270 people is something which in Scotland there's still a debate about. Unfortunately, outside of Scotland, it seems to, I don't really know. The safety of the conviction of the Lockerbie bomber, Mr. McGrahy, seems to be in serious doubt, and yet the Lord Advocate has just announced recently that there's absolutely no suggestion of any doubt within the conviction whatsoever. I mean, you must have an opinion on that.
Well, there are two things. The first thing is it is absolutely beyond doubt that the key witness, who was the Maltese shopkeeper, who testified about the buying of articles from the shop that were found in a suitcase. Excuse me. He was paid a great deal of money, it turns out, by the CIA in order to give that evidence. That in itself should invalidate the conviction. But and I can say I have one, and I'm always in difficulty on this question because it wasn't my subject within the FCO, and this sounds pathetic, but I was terribly, terribly, terribly busy at the time. And I was the head of the FCO maritime section, and in the next room sat the head of the FCO aviation section, a man named Simon. And he came to see me one day to show me a piece of top secret intelligence he had, which indicated to him that it wasn't the Libyans. It was a faction operating out of Syria, I think funded by Iran. And this was just before the start of the first Gulf War. And the story was essentially that we knew it wasn't the Libyans. It was in fact the Syrians, backed by the Iranians.
Yeah.
But that as we were about to invade Iraq, we needed Syrian and Iranian support, or at least neutrality. So we weren't going to say anything about it. And that was, I can't, and I genuinely can't recall, and I may even have some of that detail a little wrong, because the guy was showing something to me. It was interesting, yes, but I was actually extremely busy with my own work, and this wasn't my work. And he caught me at a bad moment when I didn't have time to look at it properly. And I always realise I sound pathetic when I say that, and I can't. But I did see very briefly some top secret intelligence within the FCO, which indicated, an understanding within the FCO and within MI6 that it wasn't the Libyans.
Yeah, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine was the group believed to be responsible. I think probably in retaliation for the flight which the USS Vicente shot down in the Gulf of Persia, the Iranian passenger aircraft shot down by the Americans.
Yeah, I mean that certainly makes every sense. But I couldn't, and I don't think that the bit of intelligence I was showed mentioned the USS Vincennes incident, as far as I'm aware. But as I say, I'm sadly I just can't recall. But I've never felt that the McGrahy's conviction was safe, and I think the McGrahy conviction is an unfortunate blot on Scottish legal history, and I think it's all to do with opening up more widely. I think we are almost certainly going to find there are quite a few people who've been convicted of Islamic terror plots, where typically, the vast majority of those convictions, there was no bomb or no weapon or anything, just a few boastful emails. And I think that we will discover in 10 years' time that many of those convictions were just as unsafe as the guilted 4 of the Birmingham 6. And when it's a question of terrorism, and when moral outrage and feelings are very high, there's so much evidence that it's very hard to trust the judicial system. The judicial system, sometimes with the best of motives, sometimes not as a deliberate matter of incarcerating the wrong person, go very, very wrong.
Yeah, for me, it's a very difficult area. I mean, it's a political hot potato, but while we've got a legal system which is a party to this kind of thing, I'm really not happy. I really think it needs to be I mean, what they did to McGrahy was they took his life from him. They put him in a horrible jail in the back end of Greenock until he, was dying of cancer, and he lived a couple of years or something like that back home with his family. Luckily, his family got to see him before his death. But the other things that the British state have been involved in are just morally reprehensible, and it's something I think we all need to take a big realistic look at when we're thinking about where we're going with politics and what we want from a new Scotland.
There are children getting killed in drone attacks almost every week, for example.
Yeah.
Anyway, do we have any more questions from anyone listening?
I'm just having a look. There are some statements as opposed to questions. If there's no yes alliance, then we must cherish the process of politics more than fetishing the turn of a certain number of MPs to a parliament we all utterly reject. So there's just some general chit chat with the viewers there. Is there anything that you'd like to add, Craig?
No, I think it's been very useful and a good interview to do with you, and I'm happy that I gave you this chance to clear the air on some of these things. I should say I really am extremely unhappy about the entire situation. It didn't actually occur to me, to be frank, that I'd get knocked back by Party HQ when I had so much support from ordinary SNP members for the standing. I just didn't foresee this happening. And then when it did happen, I genuinely did not want to, wash dirty airing in public and go so public with it all. Had it not been that the Scotsman was tipped off and we're going to run the story anyway. But I think what I said about having to come to terms with how on earth you put the energy of the Yes campaign, when so many of the people from this campaign had joined the SNP, into a very different kind of vessel. Yeah, I think people need to start thinking about that and need to realise that the SNP is not, is a hard-nosed political party and is not the same kind of idealistic campaign that the People's Yes campaign was. So I think for those issues to start to get a public hearing and discussion is actually a process we have to go through. I'm sorry I ended up personally being the catalyst for kickstarting that process, perhaps, but I do think that's a very, very important discussion for the Yes movement.
Okay, that pretty much answers David Estey's question, which just came in just as you were speaking there. But there's another question here. Where now, Craig? How will you continue to campaign? I think you went over this earlier in the discussion, but yeah, just to finish us off, what's your plan now for? You're continuing with the SNP. Are you going to back the local candidate?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't chosen. I live in Edinburgh Central. Well, I live in Edinburgh Central Holyrood constituency, but it's actually in Edinburgh East, Westminster constituency. We haven't chosen the Edinburgh East candidate yet, but whoever they are, I expect I'll probably be supporting them. My feeling, it may well be that the SNP decides to expel me for being so candid and open about what's been going on with me and my thoughts on the direction of the party. So, this may be out of my hands, but my feeling is that I will continue within the SNP. I will campaign in the general election campaign in support of SNP candidates, speaking around the country anywhere I'm invited to do so. And I will try to see whether with others we can loosen up the party a bit and make it more people friendly and less. I think Stalinist might be a good word. Make it less Stalinist. Make it look less like the Labour Party internally. Make it more liberal. How about that as being a less controversial way of putting it? So I think working within the SNP is what I plan to do. What I want to try and see is what is the most senior position in the SNP I can stand for and be voted for by members without having to go through a gatekeeper vetting process by paid party officials.
No, none of those. No. Okay, well, David S. is concluding with, I'm glad you did this broadcast, Craig. It has helped me understand your position a lot more clearly. Thank you. So there you go. David S. says thank you. I'm going to say thank you to Craig Murray for joining us tonight. It's been interesting. It's good to get the insight on what's happening in Scottish politics. Thanks very much for all the people who joined us watching live. Remember, you can continue to share this around. It's all logged in the archive. And thanks very much to Jerry, who's been doing technical support for us. Okay, so Craig Murray.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed.
Very much.